Welcome back to the Delineation. I don't know what episode this is because I do these things so few and far between. But today we are talking about terrorism in the United States, and you're probably wondering why I'm talking about that. If you have been with me for the past year or two, I've done quite a few delineation episodes about the Saturn-Neptune conjunctions and the history of them, as well as the coming Civil War / World War III episode that I did that was really, really in-depth about this topic. But I have a little bit more to talk about with this, especially now that we are post-2024 election and we know that Trump is in office. This paints a little bit more of a clear picture. And something that I wanted to discuss too was one of my New Year's goals is to not care too much about the comments. It is, however, again, I'm a human being. I get stuck in them. And I saw a comment that was like, "Oh, Cameron, now that Donald Trump won, you're like saying that we're not going to get in a war or anything like that." And it blew my mind because I've literally said in like 5 different videos that like, oh no, we're still getting into a war no matter what we do. It's just more so about, how is it going to look and what will be the response? In fact, I'm writing something down because I forgot about another war I want to write about. But anyway, what I would like you to do as much as you can, and this might be a little bit hard, and I'm going to do my best to not be too tongue-in-cheek in this episode, is suspend your moral framework about how things should be, and also suspend your political tribalism on what team you want to win. Because that's not how this works. These things are going to happen regardless if you think they're fair, if you think that they're justified, if you don't think that they're justified, etc. And so the reason I say that is we live in a time with Pluto and Aquarius, as well as we move into the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and the digital ID stuff and how war will be used and weaponized as propaganda to activate other stuff. You and your attention, we live in the attention economy. Your attention is the most valuable thing, and it's really important about what you put your attention to. And the things that you put your attention on, again, I've talked about this in a few other episodes, but you should look up a woman on YouTube named Allison McDowell, and you should look up Allison McDowell, social impact. And if you understand what social impact is, it's this kind of new betting market that the technocracy is moving into that essentially is, hey, we're going to take your, for example, you have an advertiser ID on your phone, and based off that, they could track what you purchase and all that other stuff, and they know what ads to throw at you. Now imagine that, but they want to see what actions you will take besides making purchases. And social impact is essentially like, hey, what sort of media and other things are going to get you to mobilize and do these other things. Why am I saying all that? This coming 4 years is going to be incredibly polarizing, and you will feel compelled to take certain actions. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't. It's more so of the biggest thing to ask yourself are these your ideas, or are they a product of what you are watching? Really think about that. Are these your ideas? Are these your genuine ideas? Or is this what ChatGPT, is this what social media, is this what this trending hashtag is telling you to do, telling you to think? And when you're super obsessed with just thinking this thing and just looking at this thing, and so because you give it attention, the algorithm puts more of that into your face. So you think about it more, and then you kind of do the mental gymnastics things where it makes it make sense for you. That's what you have to be aware of, because a lot of that's coming up. But I'm making this episode about terrorism because regardless of if Harris was going to win or Trump was going to win, we're going into a World War III scenario. We're going into a social conflict here in America. And it's just really dependent on how it looks. And today I want to break down how I think it's going to look now. Because I think now that we know that Trump is in office and we see the things that are going on, the picture is a lot more clear. So the first thing I want to talk about is the coming wars. The first war, there's 4 wars that we're looking at. Number 1 is Russia and NATO. If you are following people like I think Dan Waite's World Astrology Report talked about this. I know S.J. Anderson has talked about this, and I've been talking about this for like literally 3 years at this point. Every time Saturn conjoins Neptune, big thing happens with Russia. It's just kind of how it goes. And I think me and SJ talked about like, why is Saturn and Neptune such a Russia thing? Like, and he was like, they're just so Neptunian in some way. Anyway, Saturn conjoining Neptune is going to be a Russia movement, and with how things are, debating on, again, depending on, hey, is Trump going to broker a peace deal or whatever? It almost doesn't even matter. You know, something I wanted to show you guys was, let's actually look up. Here we go. Is you guys might have seen this a couple months ago that there were some undersea cables that were being cut, but this was here in January. This is Sunday, January 26th. Baltic undersea cable likely damaged by external forces. There was a NATO warship in the area during this time. And if you know anything about like war, like cutting off communications is kind of a big deal. And for a lot of people, they don't really think of this as a big deal, but this is just one of those tiny marks that is like, hey, that could be nothing, but it's hard to not stack it up into the like, hey, that's a concerning small step. It's just moving a small pawn in the chess game. So Russia, NATO, and again, if you really want my ideas about the Russia thing, watch my episode, my delineation episode about the Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. I did it in 2023. If you just go to my YouTube channel and you look at delineations, watch my Saturn-Neptune when I really break this down. But that's happening. And my question now is if, let's say, Trump is talking about pulling out of NATO, is it when he pulls out of NATO formally, there is some sort of act that then creates a conflict with NATO and Russia? And I also seen a video about that they're thinking about putting up some peacekeeping troops between France and the UK to be sending to Ukraine, and it was somewhere, I think it was on like 50,000. Now, here's the thing with this, and this is where you know I'm really looking at. In this year of 2025, if you are still taking exactly what any media, by the way, it doesn't matter if it's left or right-wing media, if it's mainstream media, or even independent media's idea of what something is like at face value, I don't think you are honoring the past, meaning so much has been lied to us over this past, really, I mean, you could look at since JFK, but honestly, since 9/11, you can't look at all of the stuff that's going on and just say, oh, they're being 1,000 and completely 100% honest about what's going on. So, for example, let's say there is a Russia-NATO thing. It's not going to be like, oh my God, Russia all of a sudden attacked France for no reason. You need to be really skeptical about what reasons they're telling you a war started. For example, like with Russia and Ukraine, if you still have the American education system understanding of Russia, Ukraine, which is the American education system primarily works off good guy, bad guy, good team, bad team, and Russia bad, Ukraine good. You are going to be your attention and your emotions are going to be weaponized against your own good and for the good of other people. And I shouldn't say that's fine. That's just the reality of everything that's going on. And if you don't acknowledge that, like, oh, well, there was a coup in 2014 and, yeah, sure, NATO's over there. And yes, also there's Russian propaganda, which is like, yes, there was Nazis in Ukraine, but that wasn't the only reason Russia was going over there. Like there was other interests involved. And, also too, there are North Korean soldiers being thrown in there. And then why is North Korea doing arms deals with Russia and stuff like that? You have to understand there's a lot more nuance to these wars. And that at the end of the day, they are all about money. And there's also, again, like the mineral land grab that the U.S. is trying to do, and all the contracts that BlackRock has on rebuilding Ukraine. You have to understand, like, it's not good guy versus bad guy. And we're adults. Like, that's not how any of these wars have worked. Really, since, World War I. World War I was not a good guy, bad guy. And that was probably no war's ever been good guy, bad guy. So there's the Russia-NATO conflict, right? Now I want to add to, and I brought up this article just to be like, hey, Baltic undersea cable likely damaged by external forces. This is something adding up, and we could talk all day long about these other stuff, but another article that came up in October, so this is around October 15th. This was right when Mars was in shadow, by the way. This was really like ring my bells. North Korea blows up parts of inter-Korean road and rail links in a symbolic display of anger. Now, there's a lot of propaganda around North Korea in a lot of ways. And again, that's just like for a lot of people, there's propaganda on all sides. Like that's the biggest thing is you have to go, what is North Korea saying about America? What is America saying about North Korea? And then where's the kind of truth somewhere in the middle? Like, for example, like if you talk to people in South Korea, the conflict with North and South Korea is actually like really sensitive. It's not like they're like, oh, North Korea is so bad and we need to go to war with them, like how we were in 2017. They have like a lot of family there. It's really complicated. They don't really want to do it, but it's kind of a thing. And I'm not really all that knowledgeable on current North and South Korea relations. However, I kind of did study a little bit of like North Korean communism, which is like its own flavor. And there's a lot of really interesting things about their version of communism. But why I'm saying all this is when this came up, essentially what they did was they blew up roads from North Korea to South Korea. Now you might ask yourself, well, why would they do that? That doesn't sound like North Korea is going to invade South Korea because they don't have the roads to get there. But what it does sound like is now there's not really too many accessible ways for South Korea and North Korea to drive in between each other. And this would be also, in my opinion, this is like, oh, they're cutting off roads so South Korea can't invade North Korea. That's the way I look at that. And they'll just be using mostly a missile-based war, which is what a lot of the next few wars are going to look like anyway. But this is generally concerning. Also, if you look at the fact that North Korea is really pumping up their arms deals with Russia, North Korea is sending troops into the Russia-Ukraine conflict in order to actually get some combat experience for their troops. They just have a bajillion people. Like there's so much ammo and other things that that North Korea is able to like really deploy. So North Korea and South Korea really seems like a flashpoint to me too. And I brought this much more up in the Saturn-Neptune delineation I made. So I want you to watch that. But the reason I'm going over all this right now is there's so much war that's about to kick off. And I'm going to then bring that and condense that back into the United States' role and how that looks like domestic terrorism. Okay. So but I want to bring out the wider picture here. So how much North Korea and South Korea affects here on the homeland, I don't really think too much. Simply because it will be mostly, troops that are stationed in Okinawa and the Philippines and Guam and stuff like that are going to be activated and deployed there. And that will be, I don't really know what to think of with this war, although it's going to be really fucking sad, to be honest with you. But essentially, Saturn-Neptune made the armed assist in 1953 in Libra. This is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction opposite Libra in Aries. So Libra is peace, Aries is war. Kind of hard not to be like, it's so literal, it's so symbolic. How could it not be? I hope it's not, because this is going to be a really fucked up war if it happens. This one will be really ugly. But anyway, so that's kind of going on. A lot of people get really caught up in China versus Taiwan. Personally, I don't think China-Taiwan happens till 2027 for a few reasons. And that's something I'll probably make more of a video on a little bit later. And that will look a little bit more clear as time goes on, especially if there's any sort of, again, tariffs that are placed on China, what that ends up doing economically, if that is in their best interest to go for it. I don't really think it's until 2027. I am open to being wrong about China-Taiwan. And when I say I'm open to being wrong, I'm like 90% confident about Russia, NATO, and North Korea, South Korea. I feel really good about those two happening based on the astrology. I don't like both of those happening because, again, it's going to be really devastating. I don't like any of this happening, by the way. Although I am very anti-war, it's one of those things too that, like, to act as if this stuff isn't going to happen, to act that there's not other bigger corporate interests in the destruction of Europe. Like, look at what's going on in Europe right now, as well as even here in America. There are so many, what people fail to think about is, a lot of people are like, oh my God, we live in an oligarchy now that Trump is like talking about having Elon Musk run stuff. And I didn't see anyone talk about the oligarchy when Bill Gates was in charge of making domestic policy around health. And so it's one of those things where people are just ignorant to anything that isn't what they want to see. And it's really frustrating. But there are corporate interests that are in the pockets of each side. And there's no one big boogeyman there's all of these bigger corporate interests, there's all of these bigger NGO interests that are all fighting for the same power. Like, not all of them are friends, if that makes sense. And so you'll see them all kind of in these positions of power, and some of them are all connected, some of them are not, are disconnected. But they're so, like, Donald, and the reason I wanted to say that this way is if you subscribe to I do believe Donald Trump is going to be more peace oriented for most stuff. I am concerned about Iran and that war coming up, and we'll talk a little bit about that. However, I mean, like, he literally already signed a peace deal in Palestine or Gaza and Israel. That's a really fucking big deal. Way too many people died in that war. Same thing. It sounds like Russia, Ukraine might have some sort of peace deal. Although the reason I'm saying that is Trump might be able to, on the surface, create a peace deal, but there's so much money. There's the second we pulled out of Afghanistan, which we have spent, what I believe, let me Google this. How much money, how much money did we send to Afghanistan? Let's look this up. So the U.S. is the largest international donor. How much money did we spend on Afghanistan? 2.3 since invading Afghanistan in 2001, the United States has spent 2.3 trillion to the war. Okay. 2.3 trillion dollars. Gravy train stops. Do you find it coincidental whatsoever that immediately after that ended, the Ukraine war started, and that everybody in Congress decided to say, hey, fuck the American people. We're totally doing the gravy train in Ukraine. And how much money have we spent in Ukraine versus how many people have died? How many lives has that actually saved? Again, I really hope in retrospect people give more attention to the fact that the Biden administration did not end that war, or the war in Gaza. Like, so many people died for literally no fucking reason. But you have to understand, if Trump is going to shut off this war in Palestine, he's going to shut off the war in Ukraine, the money doesn't just stop. The money's going to go somewhere. You have to understand that the military-industrial complex and the corroded rot that is inside the system, whether no matter if it's politicians or real estate and oil, that money has got to find a way to get into the pockets of people. It's going to be another war. And this is the sad part about the Trump administration, is while there is going to be a lot of surface level peace stuff, there's still going to be war that kicks off. And again, all of it's going to be blamed on Trump. Just like, again, seeing liberals all of a sudden care about economic policy and inflation, and everyone being like, oh, this is Trump's economy. Eggs are expensive. Like, okay, so you just completely ignored the inflation of the past 4 years. Again, it makes me feel like I'm taking crazy pills. But I say that to say, when these wars stop, there will be more wars. That was how it's going to go. So now let's talk about Iran. So Iran is really interesting because and I'm still on the fence of how this is going to work out, because what you have to understand about Iran was in 1953, the CIA led a coup to overthrow the government in Iran and install the Shah. The Shah was a pro-Western leader that was going to allow the UK, and I think it was British Petroleum, access to the oil fields in Iran. Now, this is also a big reason why the Iranian Revolution happened, was because of the idea of Western forces being inside there, and then again, the rise of more secular Islam. The Trump and the Republican Party really want that war with Iran, and again, it's why do they want a war with Iran? Why should America be in the Middle East? Well, it has something to do with our greatest ally and their interests, but that's a whole other conversation that I don't think people are ready for yet. So anyway, the Iran war might happen. The Iran war is a little bit more interesting simply because it's still another, Middle Eastern state. They're not really the strongest. They have a lot of missiles. The missiles really can't reach America yet, so it's kind of like another, again, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. And again, the idea that even, during the middle of, the Biden administration leaving, the Trump administration coming in, Syria collapsed. People aren't understanding how big of a deal that is. The Syrian war was really the first flashpoint where America and Russian interests collided. Russia, if you are still believing the idea that everyone's a Russian puppet or, a Putin propagandist, you again, what you're doing is essentially taking face value, whatever the mainstream media is telling you to believe in. That's not to say that Putin is a good person. That's not to say that everything that they do is perfect and the propaganda that they're saying is absolutely truthful. But you have to understand, America is the bad guy, and they've been for a really long time. And not just like since the 2000s, like way before that. Anyway, the fact that the Syria civil war lasted for almost a decade, and it was a pretty brutal war. And then pretty much right as the Trump administration was about to come in, the CIA pretty much flooded more money to give these rebel groups, which are essentially the same terrorist groups that were paying Israel to attack. It's the same thing. Again, we're doing the same things. We play both sides here, so we're always on top. Like that's just, that's been like since the Reagan administration, since the Nixon administration, really since like even Lyndon Johnson. We play both sides, right? And again, I'm going to go into the terrorism stuff, but you need to really understand like this war stuff on the outside first. So we pay all these terrorist organizations essentially to overthrow Syria. They overthrow Syria. That's a big one. That's like that's going to be incredibly important over the next decade. Very similar to how in 2014 when the Maidan coup happened and, Ukrainian government was essentially bombing Eastern Ukrainian people that were mostly Russian identified and killed I think it was 15,000 people over the period of 10 years. And that was a big reason also why that happened. And people ignore that a lot. That's the same kind of thing. So we have the wars coming up. The wars coming up are going to be Russia, NATO, North Korea, South Korea, China, Taiwan. I don't think it's until a 2027 thing, although I'm not as confident about that. And again, Iran. And again, the reason Iran is that's just a part of they've had that plan forever. And again, our greatest ally in the world that we love, they can never do any wrong. There's just so much money interest. There's just so much blackmail. There's just so much other shit that that's happening. So why am I bringing up terrorism in this episode? Let's bring this up. So actually, I want to bring okay. Let's go to 2026 here, because really I think 2026 is the hot point, in my opinion, where it's like we are kinetic, we are hot, it's happening. The last time Neptune entered Aries, literally the day the Civil War started here in America in 1861, the day after that, Neptune entered Aries. And that was a big part of photographs started, the photograph was invented, and the photographs that we saw on the war front were actually a big influence of getting that war to end. Neptune going into Aries was very symbolic of the Civil War starting. That was also, if we fast forward to about July of 2026, there was a Mars-Uranus conjunction. Now, why does Mars-Uranus conjunctions matter? Now, I talked about this in my World War III Civil War video. This country was founded on a Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini, and you could argue that the Revolutionary War was technically the first Civil War. Then 84 years later, when Uranus went back into Gemini and Mars conjoined Uranus in Gemini, was the day the Civil War started. And then 84 years later, we're at World War II, where in 1945, August of 1945, we dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan. And so we're in the middle of war. So the first 2 make the most sense. The third one is like, okay, we're already engaged in a war. We're not actually being attacked. It's not Civil War stuff. That's a whole other topic that we're going to go a little bit more into. But this is the first Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini out of 4 that we get. We get one in 2026, we get one in 2028, we get one in 2030, and we get another one in 2032. My opinion is it's going to be between 2026 and 2028. One of those 2 are going to be the big one, where America is either being attacked on the homeland or we are in the middle of engaging on a global conflict. It's one of those two. I lean more towards 2026. So why am I talking about this? When we were in 2023 and 2024, I look at the astrology and I go, well, we're going to go into a civil war, but what is it going to be? It is hard to fathom like American troops attacking American civilians. And I know there's a lot of people that think that we live in this dictatorship now that Trump is there, and everyone ignored the past 4 years and how honestly, like if you study any sort of American history, Biden was genuinely one of the worst presidents we've had. And he was literally like not even there for it. And they ignored all of that. They ignored all of the, again, unconstitutional measures he did, like the vaccine mandate. That's a really big one for, again, bodily autonomy. Is Trump doing unconstitutional measures? Yes. It's really nice too about the birthright citizenship thing where, like, again, I really agree that the birthright citizenship is being weaponized. I don't necessarily agree with it being getting rid of, but thank God we have courts where courts can battle that stuff. Anyway, so why am I saying this? I'm saying all this because it was hard to understand what it looks like then, but I have 4 ideas of what the quote unquote civil war is going to look like here. And I want to break it down for you. Let me just show you my notes, because I wrote notes on this because I've tried to record this about 4 or 5 different times. And it's really hard for me to get into this stuff without kind of just end up ranting. So civil war is going to be states going against the Fed. If you know anything about the last civil war, and again, this is for people who actually studied history, the Civil War was about it was actually about states' rights. It was about a state's rights to own a slave, but it wasn't the federal government wasn't saying, you're so bad for doing slaves, we're going to invade the South. And the South wasn't like, we want our slaves so bad that we're going to attack the federal government. It wasn't about the idea of slavery. It was about the law. That's really important to understand. And so now, again, Abraham Lincoln at the end of it made it about slavery. Like, I would agree when people are like, it was about slavery. Like, it was about slavery, but it also was about laws and states' rights. Like, that's a really important thing to understand because, for example, what we're about to go into is about what the federal government is allowed to do and what states are allowed to do. And again, about states' rights. So, for example, for example, civil war is going to be the states going against the Fed, immigrants, cartels, militia actors left and right, and Muslim Al-Qaeda stuff. I can't spell Al-Qaeda. I don't even know how to spell it, but anyway, we're going to go over this, but I want to talk about first, about the state stuff. So this to me was really interesting and scary. So resistance state, tracking California's lawsuits against the new Trump administration. This is also happening in Illinois when it comes to the federal, the state not working with the feds and ICE in terms of deportation. And I was trying to look up the article for this and I couldn't find it just because the internet's broken. But essentially, California is opening up their purse, their coin purse, to battle any sort of mandate that Trump puts down. Now, that is somewhat par for the course. But you're going to see something where the federal government will have a right or will argue that they have a right to do something and the state can't not listen to it. And why this is important is when you see the states fighting against the federal government is how the Civil War started. That's really important to understand when we talk about cyclical history. Astrology is another medium to study cyclical history. It's not about what side is wrong and what side is right, and this is why it's so important, because again, we're not talking about slavery. We're not arguing about slavery here, but what was the whole idea about slavery? It was like these states' rights to own slaves, and these states wanted to do it. These other states were against it. It was sort of a moral thing, but it came down to, again, there's no laws around morality, but there's law around what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And that's what those states came into conflict with. And this was building up for a long time. And then these states started not listening. And when it came to, and I've said this too, if Kamala won, it wouldn't surprise me if right-wing states tried to secede. That wouldn't surprise me. Sometimes I look at this though and I go, well, damn, are leftist states going to secede? I don't know. I wonder how much that does come up. I wonder how much the states argue with the Fed to a certain degree. Like, for example, and this is just a hypothetical right now, but what happens when Trump sends the military to the southern border in Southern California? And because California is the sanctuary state, there's all these sanctuary cities, does Gavin Newsom activate the National Guard, the state guard, and there's a kickoff there? That is civil war. That is the Civil War, and we already saw that starting in Texas last year, where the state and the Fed were arguing with one another, but it was flipped. It was reversed. The Fed was like, let's let all the immigrants in, and the state wanted to cut that off. We're going to see that flipped. And so this is a really important thing to acknowledge on a historical level. The state and the Fed arguing over policy, arguing over what their rights are to do and what their rights aren't to do. So this, to me, might be what that civil war is. Now, the reason I titled this episode Terrorism is part of me has started to divorce the term civil war with what we're about to go through and start to implement the term home territory, there being kinetic fights here in America. Why? So there's this that's happening, right? Also, by the way, like California will not help Trump's deportation plans. That's on the surface not that big of a deal, but we're not going into a peaceful time. By the way, too, for the people that think that, like, you know, there won't be new wars under Trump, which, like, I would argue the only war Trump would formally start is going to be with Iran if that does happen. I'm still not 100%. I'm more confident about Russia and North Korea than I am about China and Iran right now. But that's just right now. That could change. Although the Middle East is still totally like on the books. I say that because there will be, just like I don't find it coincidental that COVID happened under Trump, and that all of these things that happened during COVID happened under Trump because it was used so much as the scapegoat against Trump. Like, there were people saying, oh, Trump is the reason COVID is here, literally when every other country was also facing it. And so I don't find that coincidental that all of that happened. I don't find it coincidental that we're going to go into these times of war while Trump's in office. I think the majority of it won't be started by him. But again, for example, if Trump does pull out of NATO, is that when and I'm open to the idea of Russia actually attacking a NATO member, although people thinking that Russia is trying to go back into the USSR and take over land is just false. That's not what he's doing. There's no point into that. However, him attacking a NATO country would be, I'm open to that happening and that being truthful, but also it's hard to look at some of these things and not prepare for a false flag, because it doesn't really need to happen anymore. Wars, as we go into this digital world of AI and the AI video that we see, nothing actually has to happen. They can fake all of this. And within 30 seconds of news breaking, and it swarms the nation, it swarms the world, and nothing might have happened, there can be executive decisions based off that false information to make to take military action. That's terrifying. That's the really scary part, in my opinion, about Saturn, Neptune, and Aries. But nonetheless, let's go back to the kinetic homeland stuff. So Trump's going to send oh gosh. Okay, so Trump is going to send troops to California. They're going to deport people, blah, blah, blah. So let's do this. I want to talk about the cartels immigrants and militia actors. Number one, there's a lot of talk, and I'm not really sure how this is going to happen or if it happens. I would argue that we're going into a cowboy era. We're going into digital cowboy era, which the last time the cowboy narrative was around Neptune and Aries and Uranus and Gemini was when cowboys were really big. So the cowboy theme of the next few years are going to be really big. Now, I wonder how we're going to go if we go to war with the cartels. What people don't understand about the cartels is that it's not like some, delinquent, like low income Mexican dudes with tattoos. The cartel has a stronger military force than the Mexican government. They're fucking loaded to the gills. They are not just, whatever. They're not just like, fucking around. They are a formidable group. Trump declared them a terrorist organization. That is a really, really, really big deal. Trump declaring them as a terrorist organization allows things like funding, more executive orders, more military action against the cartels. If you think the cartels are just going to go, oh, okay, we'll stop our couple $100 billion or even $1 trillion drug flow that's also backed by the CIA and all this other stuff, and that's what the CIA washes their money. And then the ATF, by the way, also gives guns to the cartel and all this other shit. Do you think that's just going to stop because Trump declares them bad guys? If you think they're just going to roll over, it's not going to happen. And something you need to understand is there's a lot of cartel shit going on in the United States. In every major city, there is cartel action. There are no like black drug gangs anymore. The cartel took over all of the drug gangs. And that's really important to know. Like, for example, the Venezuelan gangs that you heard about over the like last year, they're not as important as like things like, again, like the I can't even think of all the gangs because there's so many there's so many cartel wars going on in Mexico right now. And if you know, like I started reading a little bit about like Mexican politics and like how the last election, I mean, like it was like 30 people that were running for office last year were assassinated. Whoa. That's kind of a lot. So I say that because so if he declares war on the cartels, this is what's going to happen. They're going to send special forces inside of the Mexico border, like Tijuana and the Sinaloa era. You're going to see the cartels retaliate, and you're going to see them retaliate inside of the United States, and that's a really important factor to understand. They're not here. They're not just going to go fight that at home. They're going to bring that here. And this is where I've been thinking about, oh, well, now that he's declared the cartels terrorists, this makes more sense for looking at this and going, oh, well, there's going to be kinetic energy happening, kinetic conflict happening here in the States. Is this related to the cartels? Is this related to, again, there being a organized attack? Or again, is it going to look very similar to, and again, because I've talked a lot about this, I think if there is some sort of a civil conflict here, it's going to look really similar to the Troubles in Ireland, which is essentially there was just like random assassinations, car bombs going off, pretty low key for the most part, and I still think it will look that way. But this is like, oh, I wonder if this is cartel stuff, because that's a really big deal, and a lot of people aren't actually looking at that for what it is. Like, the cartels are really, really, really deep inside this country in ways that you guys aren't even like ready for all of that info. And that'll start coming out if that eventually comes out, but that's just another wormhole to go down. Now, why do I say militia actors, left and right? So, number one, what's really important to understand about this country, and this is something that the European mind cannot comprehend this, nor can the socially left mind comprehend this. It is actually 1000% legal to have a militia in this country. Now they're trying to ban that stuff. Now, why do I say that? because they're going to weaponize this idea. Like they've already like, oh, the Oath Keepers, 3%ers, and whatever. If you want to bag on them and think they're bad guys, that's your prerogative. But the idea that they're like illegal is it's just not like, you know, they have the legal right to do that. Like that's a part of the Second Amendment right, is to do that. And again, the Second Amendment essentially says, hey, you're allowed to have guns to overthrow the government if the government's too tyrannical. And that's a good thing for both leftist and right politics, in my opinion. I think it's very healthy. Now, the reason I say, let's talk about the right. And the reason I say the right is it's already so, I want to start here because it's already so obvious, right? Like 3%ers, Oath Keepers, all of this shit. And there was this article that came out that was like, some guy in Utah was this doctor and he climbed the ranks in these right-wing militias in Utah and he became the boss and he did it just to open up, and he was like, there's all these cops, blah, blah, blah. You need to learn about Ruby Ridge. If you don't know what Ruby Ridge was, or even again, Waco, Texas, and the ATF working with the FBI, or again, let's talk about January 6th. A lot of people still think that that was this insurrection, when it was proven, like literally, it was like a week before I think Donald Trump got inaugurated, that there was like 23 FBI informants inside of January 6th, that January 6th group of people. If you want to look at the kidnapping of Gretchen Whitmer, it was all feds. Why is this important? Since the fucking 90s, the Fed being the ATF, the FBI, the CIA, Homeland Security, all these other things, mostly FBI and also the ATF, takes informants and they put them inside these groups, but they overwhelm, like in the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping, it was literally all federal agents, and there was like one guy who wasn't a federal agent, and they kind of just convinced him to join along, and he was kind of okay. He was like the only guy that went to prison for it. You need to understand that, and I know there's a lot of people that are going to be upset with this idea that like, oh, but there's all these Oath Keepers, 3%ers. Like this article that like, oh my God, this guy, like that's all fucking Fed bait. All of it's Fed shit. Like, by the way, too, like I've told people I'm really into guns and tactical stuff. It is like a known thing for them. And most of them are like conservative or right wing. Like it's no one trusts anyone because everyone's all fucking feds there. Like the amount of organization that's happening there, I think is a lot less than people think, because there is so much distrust over, again, not just like, oh, you might be a Fed. This is a 30-year history. If you understand how Waco, Texas happened, if you also understand how Ruby Ridge happened, it was feds informing other feds about all lies. And you need to understand that too, especially if you're someone that disagrees with right-hand politics and you agree with more left-hand politics, like you're not safe either. So why am I saying that? So we already know about the right-hand militias, right? I think there are genuine people that like believe in their cause that are involved in that. But I do think that the amount of infiltration by the feds is so high that you have to be really skeptical if like something happens with them. Now, I mean, again, too, if you know like about Proud Boys, Gavin McInnes talked about this. If you've ever watched Gavin McInnes, the fact that Gavin McInnes is like labeled as this like Nazi, if you ever watch one of his videos, he's literally like a closeted gay guy. Like all he does is talk about fashion and bitch about like liberals. Like he's literally not, it's just crazy to me that people think he's that crazy. But he's talking about, he doesn't even run the Proud Boys anymore. He's like, he got infiltrated with fucking feds, which is just crazy to hear from the horse's mouth. But let's talk about left-wing stuff for a second. When I see like who's the guy, Luigi, guy that shot the United Healthcare CEO, you are going to see more left-wing people take up arms. Now, as someone who's a Second Amendment absolutist, great. I love seeing people take up arms because I believe that is what makes this country super fucking great, is we have the ability to do that. Now, what I'm also seeing online is disturbing. Why am I saying that? We don't live in a world anymore in which the digital and the physical are separated. They are connected. They are interlinked. The digital world is the physical world, or at least the digital world is the beginning of what will happen in the physical world. That's really important to understand. And the more and more that our attention is focused in on the digital world, and our attention span is being more and more weaponized. And again, look up social impact. There are now betting markets on, if we throw this information at you, will you take this action, or this action? And they will bet against that. Like, for example, let's say you're involved in these small fringe groups, whether it's left or right. Well, people will bet on your engagement whether or not you show up to their meetings or you show up to their riots. And again, like, at least the Palestinian protesters they started getting a little bit smart. They started leaving their phones at home. I think it's going to be a little bit more complicated than that, because you're going to have to start getting really creative with how you do that. But I say all that to say, the stuff I'm seeing online is people genuinely thinking that the Trump administration is going to be so bad that they will have to take up arms. And the difference in rhetoric that I hear on the right versus the left is the left seems more captured by frenzy, if that makes sense. Like the George Floyd riots. And again, it's 2025. George Floyd he overdosed on fentanyl. He did. He didn't die from the knee thing. And the more you look into the case, the more you're like, wow, this is fucking really bad. And that's a fact. It's fucking fact. It's not, like, again, Derek Chauvin was literally following his policy for his police department. And the retaliation against that, the amount of, again, damage that was done during that time was fucking insane. And why do I say that the left is more what's the word I'm looking for? Influenced by like frenzy, is I think you'll see times where, example with like the ICE raids, everyone is saying that, like, you know, this is fascism, that, you know, all this other stuff, and it's simply not. It's simply a very fucking shitty situation. In my opinion. Like, people were comparing this to, like, oh, they started kicking out like the Jews. The Jews did not go over the German border illegally and take all of their, you know, and were, you know, using the social system to have benefits. It was a very different situation. Again, like, I have my own nuanced opinions about how all that is happening, but what's important is that there's a lot of people that see this as an act of fascism, and that they will retaliate because of that. And I do think you will see more left-wing militias, and I do think that you will see them get kinetic at some point. Like, the George Floyd riots were simply a reaction to the news. And I think that was a good testing ground on, because again, if you don't think that there's going to be feds, like, if you're like a left winger and you're like, this is all fascism, and you're starting to get like really deep into like, you know, groups that are going to retaliate or like Antifa stuff, if you don't think you're getting fucking infiltrated by feds, like, you're fucking dumb. You're fucking dumb. And you're going to get infiltrated by feds, and there's going to be all of this social impact stuff that is pushing you to do something. They want you to do all that stuff. Again, I've also talked about this too, is this is why the digital ID thing is going to be so important for both. And again, like, Trump, like, I would argue, like, I'm more of like a pro-Trump person, but like the idea that he's doing this whole AI, $500 billion AI thing for like mRNA vaccines and for the digital ID stuff is like such bullshit. But like, hey, guess what? The Harris administration was going to do that too. And I wish, you know, he would be like against that, but like, whatever. I say that because if you don't think that these left-wing people aren't going to start organizing, if you don't think that the Luigi thing was not a martyr, who, again, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, but if you don't think that that's going to not motivate people to start actually taking kinetic action, that's important. Now, so that's the left and the right wing stuff. And because again, the thing that you guys have to understand about power dynamics is it's not good guy versus bad guy. There are so many interests all fighting for the top. Does that make sense? Like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg are not on the same team. They might have similar interests that they can work together on certain things and not work together on other things, but they're not on the same team. I say that because, for example, if like the amount of stuff that's going to be happening, for example, like, let's say there's a Russia-NATO, you know, a kinetic war that breaks out. It's not Russia bad, we are good. It's so much more complicated than that. It's so much more. And now, again, it's a tragedy. What's happening in Ukraine is genuinely a tragedy. But to think that it's just we good, them bad that's how you are going to get used. You're going to get played like a fucking fiddle over these next few years, to be honest with you. Now, I want to talk about this Al-Qaeda shit for a minute, because this to me has been really, really interesting. A lot of people, if you remember on New Year's, there was a guy that blew up a Tesla truck at the Trump Tower. He was saying that we did, weapons of mass destruction, or we did like a fucking a war crime in Afghanistan. Shocker. And that there was all these drone stuff, which, by the way, the drone stuff is military tech. I've talked about this. I predicted this in 2023, by the way. If you watch my 2024 bingo card video, my predictions, anything that you hear about the Malaysian flight that went missing, anything that you hear about like UFO stuff, it's military tech. We have not spent pretty much $1 trillion on the military for like the past 30 years. Really, we have not spent as much military. We have not spent as much on the military over the past 80 years. And you think that we can't stop at ICBM? You think that literally like trans soldiers are like the craziest thing that we've got? Like, I know I'm saying that kind of tongue in cheek, but like we have shit that you don't know about, and it's going to start coming out during this next war, which is at least a little bit interesting. But that's probably what the drone stuff is it's not UFOs. Aliens are not here. Do they exist? Yeah, probably. Are they here? No, it's military tech. Which in my opinion is like 10,000 times more scary, to be honest with you. Like, oh shit. Anyway, I say that because also on New Year's Eve, there was a guy that was inspired by ISIS who drove into a crowd of people in New Orleans. That's really scary, right? Now, they've talked about that he's not actually ISIS. He was just inspired by ISIS and all this other shit. But if you watch the Sean Ryan show, and the reason I'm bringing this up is a lot of people were like, Cameron, you need to watch the Sean Ryan show. This is the ISIS attack, if you haven't heard about it. Who is Sean Ryan? Sean Ryan is this guy. Now, I want to come from two perspectives. Number one, he's an ex-CIA contractor. There is a good argument to say, well, because he was ex-CIA, you're never really ex-CIA, so this is all CIA talking points. We're going to get to that. Then there's another perspective of like, well, this guy's ex-military. He has a lot of ex-military people on there. If you know anything about ex-military, pretty much most, like 90% of people that are ex-military is like, our military is fucked and the shit that we're doing is so fucked up. Like they're not really pro the U.S. military as of today and its objectives, if that makes sense. Most of them are pretty desensitized. I shouldn't say desensitized. They do not think Iraq was a good war. They do not think Afghanistan was a great war, but they think Afghanistan was actually really complicated, to be honest with you. But they don't think Iraq was a good war. They're starting to come out from that fog of illusion, right? But Sean Ryan, he had a podcast guest that talked about what that bomber said and all this other stuff. But what I want you to do is I want you to watch one of these videos. So this is a official preview of a woman that he has named Sarah Adams. Sarah Adams is also an ex-CIA targeter. Her whole job, we'll put that in quotes for right now, was like understanding Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Taliban, all these other things, and about their like the inner workings of the terrorist groups. Now, she says she's ex-CIA. So again, is this CIA talking points that they want us to know? Or is this like genuine people? And again, I like to give a lot of these people, like I do think most people are genuine and they just kind of get used by the system, it is what it is. But I don't think it really matters if this is, look, you can even see my video right here. That's funny. I don't really think it matters either way, because if these are CIA talking points, why does the CIA want you to think this? And if this isn't, that's even scarier. And so what is this all about? Essentially what this woman breaks down, and she has like 4 podcasts with her that are like 2 hours each long, or 2 hours long each. I would recommend listening to them, albeit they might shake you up a little bit. The whole thing about this is the son of Osama bin Laden, I forgot the kid's name, the CIA and like the military says he's dead, he's technically alive, and he's intermarrying women, like daughters of the Taliban, of ISIS, of like Hezbollah and all these other things, to where essentially all of these fractal terrorist organizations, which again, if you're not familiar with the background of terrorist organizations, they're pretty much all started by the American government. Like ISIS is a product of the American government. The Taliban, Osama bin Laden was a CIA asset that we funded when he was part of the Mujahideen to take over the USSR, or to at least fight the USSR in Afghanistan in the 80s. And that's a big part as to why they collapsed in 1989 to 1991. And then we were like, oh my God, Osama bin Laden, bad guy. Right after that, because that's just what we do. So again, you have to have a lot of, like, the big thing with all the wars going on is like, you got to start learning a little bit of history now. Otherwise, you're going to be really, really fucking confused. And you know what happens when you want to find out more of a background about an event that happens is like when an event happens, you can no longer look up that event's past. Like before Russia invaded Ukraine, you could look up stuff about the 2014 Maidan coup and what was going on in the shelling in the eastern part of Ukraine and the politics about that. But then once that happened, it's impossible to find now. So start looking up this stuff now. But long story short, they are planning for an October 7th level attack here in America. Now, I want to bring up the chart because I look at this Mars-Uranus conjunction as, okay, is this a terrorist attack? And something that she says is that they're really into dates. They're really into symbolic dates. Part of me is like, dude, there's the Mars-Uranus conjunctions on July 4th. Wow. Like, I'm starting to be like, is there a betting market for terrorist attacks? Because like, not to make money off of this, but like everyone's making $1 billion off of shit coins, right? Can I make money off at least predicting the astrology, right? There is, I don't like that this is a incredibly big day for America. This is also America's, I think, this is America's 250th anniversary. A 250th anniversary, July 4th, Mars-Uranus conjunction. Not into it. I don't think that's a good thing. That's terrifying to me. I do wonder if this is when a terrorist attack happens. And again, the thing to talk about with the October 7th stuff is what they're planning for is like multiple waves of stuff. So, and again, I would really recommend listening to this. She really breaks this down. It's the idea that like, oh, they'll do like a suicide bombing and then like first responders will come in. Well, then they'll do another bombing or another shooting. They'll kill all the first responders and then they'll do another attack somewhere else. So like, just all of the resources, like first responder resources, are not there and no one's coming to save you. They're also planning on doing this in Europe too, by the way. Now, you could sit here and I think correctly argue, oh, well, that's like CIA talking points. But my question is like, why would the CIA want me to know that? Why would they want to put that fear? Now, again, that makes sense. They want the fear stuff, but I also think like the way, again, propaganda 101, there is always truth in the propaganda. That's what makes it hard to sparse out of whether or not it's the truth or a lie. That's the hard part about propaganda. And so is this like a CIA thing where they're just like making us getting scared and all this other stuff? Or is this like a real thing? I want to believe both, to be honest with you. I believe they want you to be scared, but I also believe that they're like, I don't think they're wrong about this. If you learn about, there are man pads. Let's actually look this up. Man pads in US. So the man pads, oh, you can't actually see what I'm looking up. Whoops, I'm sorry. So there's a man portable air defense systems are surface to air missiles. Long story short, there was a thing that came out that these got over the border, that they're ran by like Iran, like no one really knows, but that these are over the border, and that there was if you remember in like, I think it was like September or October, there was a plot for Iran to like attack Trump. And pretty much it was, oh no, there's just man pads that came over the border and there's like 20 of them and we don't know where they are. Which doesn't surprise me also. The thing is with these man pads is these are essentially like missiles that you can set up on your own and like shoot down a fucking plane. They're kind of big deals. And the fact that the US military is like, we don't really know where they are, is like, oh, okay. Why am I even bringing all this up? There is so much shit inside this country that's ready to pop off. 20 million people came over the border illegally. In fact, there was a video of a known terrorist that they videoed. I forgot how this all happened, but there was a video of it. I wish I just remembered it right now. Some of you would probably know what I'm talking about, but there's a video of a terrorist that came over the border. And he was like, you guys are about to see what the fuck's going to go down. And it was like a regular newscaster was like taking this video. Shit's about to go down in this country. And this is why I almost want to stop saying it's quote unquote going to be a civil war, but much more of like a formal attack in the US. there is actual fighting going on in the US. Because again, that could be between cartels. That could be, and the cartel thing will be a very extended war versus the terrorist event is going to be more kinetic. It's going to just be more like, boom, it's hot, it's a flash. Whatever attack happens in Europe is going to be scarier because here in America, we are allowed to have these things. So it makes it a lot harder for things to happen a lot of the way. And our police are essentially like small military, battalions at this point. In Europe, the police are not trained to fight the way that American police are. And if there's an attack on Europe, it will last much, much longer. It will be much, much more devastating than here in America. But again, I do think Europe has got its own problems that we'll talk about a little bit later. But anyway, why I'm saying all this too is I'm not really fully convinced that it's going to be states versus the federal government. I wonder how much of this, though, is, again, because we can even talk about the Pluto return of America and all this other stuff. But like the thing about the Pluto and Aquarius stuff that you guys have to understand is Pluto is corruption and it's fear and it's death. And it is in the sign of society, of people, of big groups of people. If you don't think that this is not going to symbolically represent a lot of death in the coming years, I just don't think you're reading the chart literally. Now, again, if I would feel more positive about it if we were headed in a better direction. As much as there's a lot of stuff that I think, and again, this is my own personal opinion, right? And you're allowed to disagree with this, that I think Trump will do things that will be in a better direction. I don't necessarily think he's this is the analogy I've made. Last election of 2024 was us voting on the captain of a sinking ship. Trump is not going to automatically make this ship stop sinking. He's not. Will he be able to do things that are better or worse? I'm not really sure. I'm open to how this is going to go. Although I do think JD Vance will replace him, to be honest with you. The Leo King put me onto that tip, and I looked at JD Vance's chart, and you're just like, oh, he is next in line. So anyway, I say that because I don't know if it's going to be a civil war, but I do know for a fucking fact there's going to be fights here in America, whether that's from leftist groups, right groups, state versus fed, cartels that are, again, and now cartels will be a little bit less kinetic, but it's also one of those things of like, you know, depending on what part of the country that you're in, you should probably be aware of that. Yeah. Now, why am I talking about this? Here's my advice. And by the way, I meant to actually say this a lot earlier. This sounds really scary. And if you want to, like, there's a lot to be scared of. I've talked a lot recently about, like, I've been getting a lot more into like my walk with Christ, and I haven't talked a lot about like my Christian views, and I'm sure that triggers a lot of people. But the biggest thing that I really think could help is I have learned a lot that fear is the devil. And that sounds like some Bayou, Bible Belt, down south, like philosophy, but think about it for a minute. You living in fear does more damage to your brain, to your hormones. Your cortisol is raised. You become more tense. You can't fight off your immune system can't work if you're stressed, if you're angry. There's so much to it. I don't want you to be afraid, because at the end of the day, most of us here are not going to be affected by anything. Some of you, it's hard to not think of that Shrek part where Lord Farquaad is like, some of you may die, but like, what was COVID? What was COVID? So many people did die. And so I can't look at this and say like, oh, we're all going to be fine. We're all going to be okay. Some of you, yeah, maybe even me. But I look at it as like, I live a life in which I'm not afraid to die. I live a life in no fear. I walk in faith. I trust that the Lord's going to protect me. And it has given me so much power in my life. Like it's hard to not talk about it, to be honest with you guys. Now, What I want to say about this is when I say what to do, no one's coming to save you. No one is. What do I mean by that? Let's say the worst case scenario, there's a big terrorist attack. And how it's going to work, and this is what the Sarah Adams girl breaks down, which in my opinion is like, oh, I'm going to listen to how she says that, is there's going to be waves. There'll be a first wave, there'll be a bunch of death, first responders will come in, then there'll be a second wave, and they kill the first responders. There is a good chance no one is going to be there to save you. Number one, you need, in my opinion, we have the Second Amendment for a reason. Carry. Use it. Now, do you need to be Rambo? No. Should you be Rambo? Probably not. But it might come in handy. And I would rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. The second thing is learning stop the bleed, how to put on tourniquets, having some sort of a med pack, I think would be very important, and having food and water. Why food and water? There might be a time in which, hey, like, there's not a lot of resources to go and get stuff, and all of the resources are depleted. And it's not because it's going to be Mad Max and everything's just going to go to shit, but just enough for like a month to where you're not needing to go to the grocery store. You're not needing food. You're not completely desperate. That's the idea. And it's the same thing with medical stuff. For example, here in Las Vegas, when the shooting happened, by the way, don't look up comparing the Las Vegas shooting sounds to an M240 versus a bump stock AR-15. You might actually start questioning what the fuck that was. And I lived in Vegas. I knew so many people that were affected by that. I saw online video at that time of there being dudes with AKs inside the Cosmo, inside that shopping mall. I had literally family members, friends that I went to school with my whole life got shot at that shooting. I'm allowed to fucking talk about that one. And I was fucking here. I was listening to the radio scanner. I was like, I mean, and that affected Vegas deeply. So, and it was also one of those, like, it was super unfortunate how much that brought Vegas together, but because there was lines for donating blood after that. But UMC Medical Center, like, you weren't getting helped. Like, they were so overwhelmed with that. And now that was also one of the biggest shootings ever. It was the biggest mass shooting here in America. But they were so overwhelmed that, like, let's say you got in a gnarly car accident and you got mangled up. You probably weren't being helped. Maybe you were, but boy, you weren't getting helped immediately. And so understanding medical, understanding what is yours to do, being safer, again, having med on you, you know, for example, too, I also saw like I've seen, like, you know, because of the sanctions, or not sanctions, the tariffs, there's going to be certain medical supplies that might be a little bit more expensive at the moment or just become harder to get. Don't be afraid to stock up on that stuff. I don't like using the term prepper because it's also too a CIA word to manipulate the masses to think that those are crazy people. It's not crazy. Don't be afraid to have stuff. And the reason I say don't be afraid to have stuff is, for me, because I've gotten so into the astrology and I've looked so much at the future of this stuff, I went a little like, oh my God, the world's going to end because of just what I'm seeing. And then, you know, you start prepping, you start getting a bunch of stuff, and you start realizing, you go, okay, what am I prepping for? What am I really realistically getting ready for? Because it's easy to just be ignorant and say, well, there's going to be a nuclear bomb and I'm going to outlast the nuclear bomb. You know, if there's a nuclear bomb, there's a nuclear bomb. But it's more so of just really common sense stuff. The other reason is I have felt so much better just having, hey, like, I've got water to last me a little while. You know, I'm not going to be lasting years and years and years off grid and have my own water supply. No. Food, I've got enough. Like, hey, if shit hit the fan and there was no, like, again, like, I mean, think about toilet paper. You didn't get toilet paper in COVID. I was lucky enough to, like, I got toilet paper right before the lockdowns happened. But people couldn't get fucking toilet paper. Like, these are real things. And so, I mean, like, look at eggs right now because of the bird flu shit. And also, too, a lot of the reason meat is so expensive is mostly because of the monopoly on the meat packing industry. It's really not farmers. The farmers make the least amount of the meat. It's the meat packing monopoly that controls how the meat is distributed. That's a whole other fucking conversation. But having some food, having some water, having some medical stuff. And the reason I like just having enough is it scratches the itch to where I don't live in ignorance, thinking nothing bad will ever happen because nothing bad has ever happened. But I also don't live in fear where I'm prepping and prepping and prepping and I'm only like I'm being a schizophrenic about it. So I have enough. Like for example, you go grocery shopping, get a couple gallons of water. You know, whether, and for you, again, like depending on your diet and your needs, get whatever you got to get. Should you go overboard? No, but have like a month's worth. It's not that hard. 30 gallons of water, like that's 30. If you get the spring water from any store, it's like $1. It's $30 worth of water. You know what I mean? If you got a small apartment, hey, get 2 weeks worth. Just don't be like, be an asset rather than someone that you have to be rescued. Have situational awareness. Does that make sense? Don't be afraid to have something to defend yourself. Because like in October 7th, you know, in Israel, they weren't allowed to have guns, but then all of a sudden, terrorist attacks time, they opened up the armories and everyone started getting guns because they went house to house. They went house to fucking house. That's terrifying. Now, is that going to happen to you? Probably not. But if there is something like that, there's a good chance. Especially ladies. I don't know why more women don't have guns. Most of my audience is women. Why don't you have a gun? It blows my mind. And it's not, and you shouldn't be doing it thinking about offensive stuff, but just defensive. Have a shotgun. Rack a shotgun. You don't have to aim. Really, you really don't have to aim. Just get some buckshot and just general direction. Like a knife isn't going to save you. It's amazing how many women have knives for self-defense. Like I would rather have pepper spray and a gun than a knife. A knife will get you fucking killed so much faster, especially if you're a woman. Like a knife is not, you do not want a guy who's trying to attack you get close enough to where you can use a knife. The whole point of a gun and pepper spray is like they can be far enough away from you to where they can't actually physically touch you. That's the point. You want to keep distance. So I say all that to say, the reason I want to make this video is, number one, there's a lot of wars that are going to be happening. I don't know if they're all going to happen all at once. I don't know if all of them are going to happen, but we're getting into at least either Russia, NATO, North Korea, South Korea, maybe Iran, China, Taiwan is a little bit later, and we'll talk more about that as time goes on. When? I haven't talked about when yet. This is becoming a long podcast, but when Russia, NATO, or Korea is spring of 25 to spring of 26, that's because as we get into the spring, we're going to have Saturn and Neptune dip into Aries. And it's the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we're really looking at here that's going to be a sign or a symbol of the war stuff. So that's that. And then that's starting spring of 2025. But then when we get to spring of 2026, that's when Saturn and Neptune formally conjoin each other. That's when we get the Mars-Uranus conjunction, okay? I think the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is going to be the timing with Russia, NATO, or with North Korea, South Korea. It might be one or the other. It might be both. Hey, it may not be either. No matter what, Russia, something's happening to Russia. Is it war? I am kind of sold that it is going to be war, to be honest with you. There's just too much, way too much money going into like Russia needs to go down. North Korea, South Korea, we'll see. Although I do think things are going to be changing there. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let's do this. And then terrorist attacks. Hey, look, could they happen spring of 25? Yeah, although I'm going to say more unlikely. Cartel stuff, I think, will probably be a little bit more aligned. It's really the summer of 2026 that really, really seems like the highlight of the kinetic energy, in my opinion. And that also goes into about summer of 2028. Because let me show you why. I really think 2027 is when war with China kicks off. Because I'm mostly looking at the Mars retrograde in Virgo conjoining Jupiter in the South Node in Leo. This seems really war, like the Chinese war, and I'll make videos more about that. But 2028, when we get to about summer of 2028, is our next Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini. Now, let's do American Sibley chart. So the reason I want to go over this, I should have actually opened up with this now that we're an hour and 15 minutes into this, but the Mars-Uranus conjunction in so when we get about to July of 2026, July 4th, This Mars-Uranus conjunction is happening pretty close to the descendant. But if we get to about 2028, the Mars-Uranus conjunction is happening with Mercury literally on the descendant. So again, there's a part of me that's like, wow, July 4th, but June 23rd, I mean, and why? You might be like, Cameron, well, what does this have to do with, why does this being terrorism or an attack? Is number one, it's a Mars-Uranus conjunction. We have it in America's Sibley chart. But if we look at the chart for 9/11, let's just do this. If we look up the chart for 9/11, Saturn was on the descendant and Pluto was on the ascendant. Pluto on the ascendant, very like terror stuff, in my opinion. It was the Saturn-Pluto opposition, which I've talked a lot about the Saturn-Pluto opposition in 9/11 before. But just like things being on the descendant is kind of a bigger deal with terrorism here, or at least there being like the seventh house is open enemies. So again, Mars conjoining Uranus during the Revolutionary War. We were fighting the British during the Civil War. We were fighting ourselves during World War II. We were fighting Japan and Germany, but this was more related to Germany. I think was already done by that point. And that was like the end of the Pacific War, or at least the war in the Pacific theater. So that's happening, right? The only other thing I wanted to talk about was, I can't remember now. So yeah, that's mostly the stuff I wanted to go over and talk about. I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are below. I do, again, this is all kind of scary stuff, but this is also one of those things that like I just wanted to go over the astrology of this. I don't think just because Donald Trump is in office, we're going to go into this super peaceful time. We pulled out of Afghanistan and then the next second later, like it's just not how the military and money and all this shit works. I think also too, people are very, very upset by the Trump administration. And I do think that they're going to leave, or I shouldn't say leave. They will fight back and retaliate in any way that they can. And I do think that might bring up kinetic fights between whether that's left and right wing militias versus each other, state guard, military, we'll see. But I do think things are going to get crazy here in this country. I pray that we all get out of it in a safe manner. But I also would just recommend, like, and this is also why I've been so on my personal development shit lately. Like, shit's about to get crazy. Why aren't you, when you live in a world in which everything is easy, it's like oftentimes we need a near-death experience to shake us into the things that we need to be doing in life. Genuinely. Sometimes you need to lose everything and you need to see how close you can get to losing everything in order to inspire you to actually take action on the thing that you're supposed to be doing in this world. I look at this time as things are going to get so crazy that you will have no choice but to be doing the thing that you were put on this earth to do. You're going to stop wasting your fucking time doing the thing that you know you're not supposed to be doing. Wasting your time on being afraid of being attacked is a life wasted. Why be afraid of dying? You're going to die. I would be afraid of dying and not even trying to do the things I wanted to do in my heart of hearts. That's why I've been so on my, like, you can hit all of your dreams. You can hit all of your goals. What is it that you want to do? Because this is going to rock your fucking world. The whole world is about to really get a wake up call on some shit. Right now. Just like how in COVID, it was really bad for a lot of people. For a lot of people, they really got to sit down and be like, what am I doing with my life? Am I doing the thing that I want to? And what you need to do is the thing that you want to, what your heart of hearts is telling you, what God has put you on this earth to do. And stop resisting it. Stop being afraid of it. Because what you should be afraid is dying and not even giving yourself the opportunity, the chance to do it. And living this life in which you live in fear of, oh, I have these dreams, but I'm scared to do it. Comparing your dreams, and I'm going to make a whole other episode about this, but comparing your dreams and being scared of your dreams is not as scary as dying, in my opinion. So I'm going to leave you guys off with that. Let me know what your comments are below. I'm sure there's going to be about 1 million comments of people being like, whoa, Cameron, you're fucking blah, 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 blah. But, whatever. my job is to do my job here, and you guys can come and go as you please. But I really love and appreciate all of you, and I'll be seeing you guys next time.